Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It had been raining since morning, the kind of cold drizzle that turned the city streets into silver mirrors. Lila gripped the handlebar of her scooter tighter, her delivery bag thumping against her back as she navigated through puddles. She worked for a small flower shop downtown, doing double shifts to pay for her mother's hospital bills. Every delivery meant a few more dollars, a little more hope. The GPS on her phone blinked red for the next stop: Cole residence, North Hill Drive. She glanced at the time and gasped. 5 minutes late. Her boss would kill her. She parked in front of a massive black gate that looked more like it belonged to a museum than a home. The kind of place where people like her never went beyond the gate. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the intercom. "Delivery for Mr. Cole," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The gate opened silently. Inside was a long cobblestone driveway lined with rain-soaked roses and a fountain in the middle, taller than her apartment building. She walked toward the front door, holding the bouquet close to protect it from the rain. Before she could knock, the door swung open. A tall man in a dark suit stood there, his expression unreadable. "You are here early," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Come in, we do not have much time before the lawyer arrives." Lila blinked, confused. "A delivery for Mr. Cole?" He frowned slightly, then looked at the bouquet in her hands. "Of course. You brought it yourself. Good." He stepped aside. "Come in." Before she could protest, she found herself inside the grand hall, surrounded by marble floors, glass chandeliers, and a silence that felt almost sacred. "Sir, I think there has been a mistake," she began, but he was already pouring coffee, his tone businesslike. "You can sit. We have to discuss the terms before the signing." Lila froze, clutching the bouquet. "Signing? I just deliver flowers." The man finally turned to face her fully, his eyes a sharp gray that seemed to see through her confusion. "You are not from the agency?" "No, I am from Bloom Avenue Floral," she stammered. For a moment, the air stilled between them. Then, unexpectedly, his expression softened. "I see. A wrong delivery, then." He leaned back, studying her, something curious flickering in his gaze. Maybe not entirely wrong. He reached for a folder on the table, his voice lowering. "Miss, I have a rather unusual proposal. You see, I need a wife. For 6 months. A contract marriage." Lila's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "I will pay you enough to cover whatever debt you are carrying," he said simply. "No intimacy, no obligations beyond appearances. Just a signature and your time." Lila's heart pounded. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the tall windows like a warning. She should walk away. She had just met this man. But the name on the check she glimpsed inside the folder made her breath catch. Cole Foundation. Ethan Cole. The same name on every charity plaque in the hospital where her mother lay. "Why me?" she whispered. He met her eyes steadily. "Because you knocked on the door when no one else dared. And because sometimes, fate chooses the wrong delivery to send the right message." The clock chimed softly in the background as Lila stood there, torn between fear and the faintest spark of destiny. The sound of rain softened against the tall windows as Lila stood frozen in the grand hall, unsure whether to laugh or run. Ethan Cole, the man who had just offered her a marriage contract, did not seem like someone who joked. He waited quietly, the faint hum of the fireplace filling the silence between them. "You look terrified," he said at last, his tone gentle now. "You should be. It is not a small decision." Lila took a shaky breath. "You cannot be serious. You do not even know me." Ethan gave a small, almost tired smile. "That might be why this could work. I am not looking for love, Miss Nguyen. I am looking for peace." He handed her the folder. Inside, neat lines of legal text blurred before her eyes. 6 months. Appearances at events. Confidentiality. Payment upon completion. And at the bottom, the number that made her pulse stop. It was enough to save her mother and pay off the debts that had been crushing her for years. Ethan continued, his voice steady. I will not touch your personal life. You will not touch mine. We appear together at 3 family functions and 1 charity gala. In return, I will handle your financial situation completely. Lila swallowed. Why me? You could hire anyone. He looked away toward the rain-soaked window. Because anyone would want something more. You just want to survive. The words landed heavier than he intended. Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of shame and disbelief. You read people too easily, she said quietly. It is part of the job, he replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked softly, marking the time she was losing by staying there. She should walk out. She should go back to the shop, explain the delay, pretend this strange moment never happened. But when she thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, her hands trembling as she signed medical forms she could not afford, the decision began to shift. Ethan noticed the flicker in her eyes and spoke again, slower this time. If you agree, my attorney will arrange the paperwork by tomorrow. If not, you can leave now and forget this ever happened. I will not stop you. He meant it. There was no persuasion, no threat. Just a quiet man making a business offer that sounded almost like desperation wrapped in control. Lila looked at the silver pen lying on the table. Her fingers tingled as she imagined her mother smiling again, healthy and free. She met Ethan's gaze. You promise my mother's bills will be paid? Before the end of the week, he said. She hesitated, then nodded. Then I will do it. 6 months. Ethan reached across the table, extending his hand. Deal. Her smaller hand slipped into his, and for a moment, the warmth startled her. His grip was firm but not cold. My assistant will contact you with the details, he said, releasing her hand. Until then, keep this. He handed her a slim black box. Inside was a simple silver ring, understated but elegant. It is just for appearances. Lila turned it over in her palm. Do people really believe love can be written into a contract? Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. They believe what they need to believe. He walked her to the door, the rain still whispering outside. As she stepped onto the porch, he said quietly, Be here at 7 tomorrow. The lawyer will bring the papers. Lila nodded, then hurried back through the rain, the folder pressed tightly to her chest. The city lights blurred through the water on her visor, and her thoughts spun faster than her wheels. What had she just agreed to? By the time she reached her small apartment, the rain had stopped. Her roommate stared as she entered, soaked and silent. What happened? She asked. Lila looked down at the silver ring still glinting in her palm. I think, she whispered, I just sold 6 months of my life. That night, as thunder rolled faintly over the city, Lila could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's calm face and heard his words, sometimes fate chooses the wrong delivery to send the right message. She did not know if it was madness or destiny, but by morning, her decision was final. The next morning, Lila stood outside the coal estate again, this time in a clean blouse and borrowed heels that pinched her toes. The air smelled of wet pavement and roses, and for a moment she wondered if she was walking into a dream or a mistake she would regret forever. The front doors opened before she could knock. Ethan's assistant, a tall woman with sharp eyes named Clara, greeted her with professional efficiency. Mr. Cole is waiting in the study. The attorney will arrive shortly. Lila followed her through the long marble corridor, her reflection trailing behind in the polished floor. The house was quiet except for the steady tick of an antique clock and the occasional whisper of rain dripping from the roof. When she entered the study, Ethan was standing by the window, dressed in a gray suit, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Good morning, Miss Nguyen, he said. I trust you slept well. Lila gave a nervous laugh. I am not sure I slept at all. His lips curved slightly. Understandable. On the table lay a stack of papers, neatly clipped and waiting. The attorney, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, gestured for her to sit. This is a standard confidentiality and marital contract. Mr. Cole has made sure everything is legal and mutually protective. As the man spoke, Lila's eyes caught the title at the top of the first-page marriage agreement. It looked surreal, her name printed beside Ethan's. Her fingers trembled as she held the pen. Ethan watched her carefully. If you want to back out, now is the time, he said quietly. No consequences. Lila looked up, meeting his gaze. No, she said softly. Let us finish this. She signed her name. The sound of the pen scratching the paper echoed louder than it should have. Ethan signed next, his movements steady and deliberate. The attorney gathered the pages and nodded. Congratulations. You are now legally married. The words struck Lila like a bell. Married. She glanced at Ethan, who only said, "You should eat something. We have a busy day ahead." The rest of the morning blurred into a series of brief instructions. Clara handed her a folder of schedules, etiquette notes, and a list of upcoming events. The engagement dinner is next week. You will need a dress fitting and basic media training. Lila tried to process everything. The house, the staff, the quiet authority with which everyone obeyed Ethan, it all felt like another world. After lunch, Clara guided her to a guest room on the second floor. It was larger than her entire apartment, with white curtains and a view of the garden. This will be yours, Clara said. You will have privacy, but remember, there are rules. No leaving the estate without permission. No interviews, no photos. And remember, appearances matter. Lila nodded, her throat tight. When Clara left, she walked to the window and opened it slightly. The scent of rain and fresh roses drifted in. Down below, Ethan was speaking to a gardener, sleeves rolled up, his tone calm but firm. He caught her watching and raised an eyebrow. She stepped back quickly, embarrassed. That evening, they had dinner together for the first time. The table stretched endlessly between them, filled with dishes she could barely name. Lila stared at the silverware, unsure which utensil to use. Ethan noticed. Start with the outer fork, he said quietly. She smiled, grateful. You have done this before, I guess. Too many times, he replied. The silence that followed was not as cold as before. When she thanked the housekeeper afterward, Ethan seemed surprised. Most people do not remember names here, he said. It costs nothing to be kind, she replied. For the first time, his eyes softened. Later that night, Lila stood in her new room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The silver ring glinted faintly under the warm light. It felt strange, heavy with meaning she could not define. She whispered to herself, it is only 6 months. But deep down, she already knew that nothing about this arrangement would stay simple. Outside, thunder rumbled again, just like the night she first met him, as if the sky itself knew that their contract had just changed both of their lives forever. By the end of the week, Lila had learned that life inside the Cole estate ran like a perfectly tuned clock. Every morning at 7, breakfast was served with quiet precision. At 9, Ethan disappeared into his office, and by noon, meetings filled the house like waves of polite conversation and expensive perfume. Clara had assigned a stylist named Ava to prepare Lila for her new public role. Ava was kind but relentless, pinning, trimming, and adjusting until every detail matched the image of a millionaire's wife. Posture straight, chin up, smile with your eyes, Ava reminded her for the 10th time. Lila tried, but every time she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger in a silk dress instead of a delivery girl who used to rush through rain with flowers. Still, she pushed through. She had made a promise. One afternoon, Ethan stopped by the fitting room unexpectedly. He leaned against the doorway, watching silently as the tailor adjusted the hem of Lila's gown. When their eyes met in the mirror, he said softly, "You look like someone who belongs." Lila laughed nervously. That is a dangerous thing to say. Someone might believe it. He gave a small smile. Sometimes believing is the first step. Then he left, leaving her heartbeat strangely uneven. The following days blurred into lessons, formal greetings, table etiquette, and interviews with Clara about what to say if reporters asked how they met. "You were delivering flowers to a family friend's event," Clara coached. "You met Mr. Cole there, and it was love at first sight. Keep it simple. People love simplicity." Lila nodded, even though the lie made her stomach twist. Each night she sat by her window, studying the script until she could recite it perfectly. Yet every time she practiced saying, "I fell in love with Ethan Cole," she stumbled. Love felt like a word too heavy for what stood between them. A week later, the first major event arrived, at dinner with several board members and their families. The dining room shimmered with candlelight and crystal glasses. Lila could feel every eye turn toward her as she entered beside Ethan. He placed his hand lightly on her back, a gesture of reassurance. "Remember," he whispered, "you are doing perfectly fine." The evening began smoothly until one of the older guests, a woman with a jeweled brooch, leaned forward and asked with a sharp smile, "So, Miss Nguyen, how does a girl from a flower shop capture the heart of one of the city's most eligible men?" The table went silent. Lila's throat tightened. For a second, the only sound was the soft clinking of silverware. Then she took a breath and smiled politely. "Maybe it is not about capturing someone," she said. "Maybe it is about being in the right place when they finally stop running." A murmur of approval rippled around the table. Ethan's gaze met hers across the candles, and there was something there, respect, maybe even admiration. As the dinner continued, she noticed him watching her differently, as if seeing her for the first time. When the guests left, Ethan walked her to the foyer. "You handled that question better than I expected," he said. "You sounded honest." "I was," she replied quietly. "For once, I did not have to pretend." He hesitated, then said, "Good night, Lila." Her name sounded softer in his voice than before. That night, Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the faint warmth of his hand still on her back. The contract might have rules, but her heart did not seem to care. The next morning, she found a small note tucked under her breakfast plate. Only 3 words were written in his careful handwriting: "Proud of you." She smiled without meaning to, holding the note against her chest. For the first time since she stepped into this mansion, she no longer felt like a stranger. Yet somewhere deep inside, she knew that moments like this could be dangerous because pretending to be in love had never felt this real. The morning of the charity gala arrived like a storm waiting behind calm skies. For days, the Cole mansion had been buzzing with preparations. Staff moved in quiet efficiency, floral arrangements filled every corner, and photographers circled the property like hawks. It was the first time Lila would appear publicly as Mrs. Cole, and the thought made her stomach twist. Ava had spent hours styling her hair into soft waves and fitting her into a champagne-colored gown that shimmered under the light. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Ethan was waiting at the bottom of the staircase in a black tuxedo. His gaze lingered for a moment before he said simply, "You look perfect." Lila managed a small smile. "Thank you. You do not look terrible yourself." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, but his eyes betrayed something else: tension, maybe even fear. "This event is important," he said. "Board members, investors, media aid will be everywhere tomorrow." "I know," she replied quietly. "I will not let you down." He looked at her, then, really looked, and said, "You already have not." The drive to the gala felt endless. The city lights blurred past, and Lila's fingers traced the edge of her silver ring. Ethan sat beside her in silence, his phone buzzing non-stop, but for once, he ignored it. When they arrived, camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Reporters shouted their names. Ethan took her hand, steady and protective, guiding her through the chaos. "Smile," he murmured under his breath. "They only believe what you show them." Inside the grand ballroom, the sound of strings and laughter filled the air. Chandeliers glowed above, scattering light across gold and glass. Lila could feel dozens of eyes on her, measuring her smile, her posture, her every move. She kept reminding herself of Ava's training: posture straight, shoulders back, smile with your eyes. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. They greeted guests, shared polite conversation, and posed for photographs that would soon appear in magazines. But peace never lasts long in rooms built on wealth and gossip. Near the end of dinner, one of the younger board members, Ethan's cousin, Mark, raised his glass and said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "To my cousin Ethan, who finally decided to marry for love instead of business. Though I must say, love seems to arrive awfully fast when contracts are involved." A ripple of laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Lila froze. Ethan's jaw tightened, his expression unreadable. Before he could respond, Lila placed her hand lightly on his arm and rose from her seat. The room quieted as she smiled at Mark. "You are right," she said softly, "love does not always come fast. Sometimes it takes courage to even open the door when it knocks unexpectedly. But I suppose some people have never answered that kind of knock." A few guests gasped, others applauded softly. Mark flushed, muttered something, and looked away. Ethan turned to her, his eyes full of surprise and something warm of pride. For the rest of the evening, he stayed close to her, his hand at her back, his words softer than ever before. When they finally returned home, the house felt strangely alive. Ethan stopped at the doorway and looked at her. "You handled yourself with more grace than anyone I know," he said. "You did not need me to protect you." "Maybe not," she said, smiling faintly. "But it was nice to know you would have." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed her a folded card. "For you," he said. Inside was a simple note in his handwriting: "For standing tall when I could not." "Thank you." Lila felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she nodded and turned toward her room. That night, as she placed the note beside his earlier message, "Proud of you," she realized something had shifted. The distance between their worlds had grown smaller, not because of the contract, but because for the first time, Ethan had seen her not as a role, but as a person. And though she still reminded herself that it was all an arrangement, her heart whispered a truth she could no longer ignore: she was falling for him. The days after the gala passed quietly, but something between Lila and Ethan had changed. The house no longer felt like a museum, it felt like a place where laughter might live, even if softly. Lila noticed small details she had never seen before: the way Ethan loosened his tie the moment meetings ended, how he always left his coffee cup slightly askew on the desk, the faint line between his brows when he read late into the night. She also noticed how often his gaze lingered on her now, not with calculation, but with a question he did not dare to ask. One evening, after a long day of charity meetings, she found him in the garden, sitting on the stone bench near the fountain. The air smelled of wet grass and jasmine. He looked exhausted, his sleeves rolled up, the tie gone. "You should be inside," she said softly, approaching him. "You are the one who dislikes the rules, remember?" he replied, his voice tired but gentle. She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. The fountain's water shimmered under the garden lights. "You seem distant lately," she said. "Is everything all right?" Ethan sighed. "The board is pressing for an expansion deal I do not trust. They believe a merger will strengthen the company, but it feels wrong. And after the gala, some investors think I am distracted." "Because of me?" she asked quietly. "Because I finally stopped living like a statue," he admitted. He turned toward her then, his eyes searching hers. "You have a way of reminding me what matters." I had forgotten what that felt like. The words made her heart ache. "Ethan, you do not owe me anything," she said. "This is a contract, remember?" "Maybe it was," he said, his voice lower now. "But it does not feel like one anymore." Silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. For the first time, he looked vulnerably. "No title, no armor." Lila saw the man behind the reputation, and it terrified her how much she wanted to reach for his hand. Instead, she whispered, "You need to rest. Tomorrow will be better." He smiled faintly. "You always say that." "Because I still believe it," she replied. As she stood to leave, his fingers brushed hers, barely a touch but enough to send a jolt through her chest. Neither of them moved for a second, caught in the fragile space between what they should feel and what they did. When she finally walked away, she could still feel his warmth. That night, sleep did not come easily. She replayed the conversation over and over, his voice echoing in her mind. In the morning, she found a single white rose on her breakfast tray with a note attached: "For reminding me to breathe." She smiled despite herself. Later that afternoon, while helping Clara organize documents for the upcoming foundation review, Lila overheard a conversation outside the study door. Ethan was on the phone, his voice tense. "No, I will not agree to terms that jeopardize the staff. I do not care about short-term profit." A pause, then, "If they want to push me out, let them try." The line went silent. Lila stepped back, heart pounding. She realized that behind his calm exterior, Ethan was fighting battles she had never imagined. That evening, when he joined her for dinner, he looked weary again. "Long day?" she asked. He nodded. "Some people think kindness and leadership cannot coexist. I intend to prove them wrong." She smiled softly. "You already are." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You should not have to live in a world where everything is a transaction." Lila tilted her head. "Neither should you." The silence that followed was tender, almost fragile. As they finished dinner, the rain began again outside, tapping gently against the windows. Ethan stood, walking to the piano in the corner of the room. "Do you play?" Lila asked. "I used to," he said, brushing dust from the keys. "My mother taught me before she passed." He played a few quiet notes, hesitant but beautiful. Lila sat on the edge of the sofa, listening, her heart swelling with emotion she could no longer name. When the melody ended, he looked at her, and in that soft moment, without any grand gestures or rehearsed lines, something shifted completely. It was no longer a contract between two strangers, it was a connection that neither of them could deny. And though neither spoke of it aloud, both knew that this fragile calm could not last forever. 2 weeks later, the illusion of peace shattered. Lila was in the garden arranging flowers for a small charity event when Clara approached, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said, handing Lila a tablet. On the screen was a headline that made her blood run cold: "The CEO's contract bride the truth behind the Cole marriage." Beneath it were photos from the gala and a leaked image of their sign agreement. Lila's hands trembled. "Who would do this?" she whispered. Clara's voice was low. "Someone inside the board. They are trying to use this against Ethan. The press is already calling it fraud." Lila felt her heart drop. She knew what this meant. Ethan's career, his reputation, everything he had built was about to crumble because of a lie that was never meant to be public. When she found him in his office, he was standing by the window, the city skyline reflected in the glass like shattered light. "You saw it," he said without turning. "Yes," she answered quietly. "They are calling me your fake wife. That is what we agreed on, was it not?" His voice was calm but distant. "A contract." Lila flinched at his tone. "Do not do that. Do not act like none of this matters." He finally turned to face her. His eyes were tired, filled with something deeper than anger, resignation. "It matters more than you think, but I cannot let them use you to destroy me. If stepping down is what it takes to protect you, then I will." "No," she said sharply. "You cannot throw everything away because of me." He moved closer. "You were never part of the plan, Lila. You were supposed to stay invisible, safe. But now they will come after you. They will dig into your past, your family, everything." Her throat tightened. "Let them. I am not ashamed of where I came from." "You should not have to fight my battles," he said softly. "You have already given enough." Lila took a deep breath, her voice trembling but firm. "You are wrong. You gave me back my dignity. Let me stand beside you now." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he looked at her with that same quiet intensity she had seen in the garden. "You will not change your mind, will you?" She shook her head. "Not this time." That evening, the media storm grew worse. Reporters camped outside the gates, headlines screamed betrayal, and investors began withdrawing. Clara and the legal team worked non-stop to control the damage, but rumors spread faster than truth. Late that night, Lila found Ethan sitting alone in the darkened study, his suit jacket discarded, his tie undone. The man who once seemed untouchable now looked human, hurt and exhausted. "You should sleep," she said gently. He looked up, his voice barely above a whisper. I might lose everything tomorrow. She walked closer and placed her hand over his. Then we lose it together. For a moment, he closed his eyes, as if the weight of those words gave him strength. You have no idea what that means to me, he said. Maybe I do, she replied softly. Outside, the rain began again, steady and relentless, like the sound of truth washing away everything false. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, they were ready to face it side by side. The following morning, the world felt different. News vans lined the street outside the coal estate, and the hum of distant voices filled the air like static. Lila watched from the upstairs window, her heart heavy with dread. She knew Ethan was downstairs preparing to face the board. When she found him in the study, he was standing tall, dressed in a crisp suit, the fatigue in his eyes hidden behind resolve. You do not have to go through with this, she said. I do, he replied. They want a confession, something that makes the story clean. But I will not let them call you a fraud. And what about you? She asked. What happens when you take the blame? He gave a faint smile. Then at least the truth stays with us. Hours later, the press conference began at the Cole Foundation headquarters. Cameras flashed as Ethan stepped to the podium. Lila stood near the back of the room, her hands clasped tightly, watching the man she had come to love walk straight into the fire. I will keep this short, Ethan began, his voice calm and clear. Yes, my marriage to Lila Nguyen began as a business agreement. But what the world does not know is that it became something real, something that no contract could define. If the board wishes to remove me, so be it. But do not use her name to justify greed. The room buzzed with shock. Reporters shouted questions, flashes exploded, but Ethan stepped away without answering another word. He had said what mattered. That evening, the news channels replayed the clip again and again. Some called him reckless, others called him honest. But to Lila, he was simply Ethan, the man who chose truth over power. When he returned home that night, the house was quiet. He found her in the living room, sitting near the fireplace, her eyes glistening. You should not have done that, she whispered. You just threw away your company. Maybe, he said softly, but I kept my soul. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Do you remember the contract we signed? She nodded. I tore it up, he said. We do not need it anymore. Her breath caught as he opened his hand. Inside was the same silver ring he had given her months ago, now tied with a thin ribbon. It was supposed to be part of a lie, he said. But it became my truth. He knelt slightly, not in a grand gesture, but in quiet sincerity. Lila, I have no fortune left to offer, no empire to hide behind. All I have is myself. But if you will stay, I will spend the rest of my life proving that what we found was real. Lila's eyes filled with tears. She knelt too, taking his hand in hers. I did not fall in love with your title, Ethan. I fell in love with the man who saw me when no one else did. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled softly beside them, and outside, the storm finally began to fade. She slipped the ring back onto her finger. It no longer felt like part of a contract, it felt like a promise. He brushed a tear from her cheek and whispered, sometimes the wrong beginning leads to the right forever. And for the first time in a long while, Lila believed him. A month later, the coal estate no longer buzzed with board meetings or reporters. The gates were quiet, the halls calm, and for the first time, peace felt real. The company had appointed a new CEO, and Ethan had stepped away from the empire he built. Many called it a fall from grace, but to him, it felt like freedom. Lila had stayed by his side through the chaos, helping him rebuild not a business, but a life. Together they started a small foundation that provided scholarships for working students, something she had always dreamed of. The office was modest, filled with potted plants and sunlight instead of marble and glass. One afternoon, as she sorted through letters from applicants, Ethan entered carrying a cup of coffee for her. You forgot lunch again, he said, placing it on her desk. She smiled. I was reading these stories. Some of them remind me of us. He leaned against the desk, his expression soft. Then maybe we are doing something right. Lila looked at him, the man who once lived behind walls of power and silence. Now his shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hands ink-stained from signing scholarship forms. He looked happier than she had ever seen him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "The boardrooms, the control, the attention?" Ethan shook his head. "No. I used to think success was measured by what I owned. Now I know it is measured by who stands beside me." He reached for her hand, and she felt the same warmth that had frightened her months ago, only now it felt like home. That weekend, they visited her mother at the hospital, now fully recovered. The older woman took Ethan's hand and said with tears in her eyes, "You saved both our lives, you know." Ethan smiled. "She did that. I just signed a few papers." As they left, Lila slipped her arm through his. "Do you realize we met because of a wrong delivery?" she said, laughing softly. "The best mistake I ever made," he replied. Weeks later, on a quiet evening, Ethan took her back to the mansion, now empty and ready to be sold. In the grand hall where everything began, he placed a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture from the scholarship office, the two of them surrounded by students, smiling. "I wanted one last thing here before we say goodbye," he said. She noticed the silver ring still on her finger catching the fading sunlight. "Goodbyes are easier when you know where you are going next," she whispered. He turned toward her, eyes warm. "Then let us go home." Outside, the sky blushed with gold as they walked down the steps hand in hand. For once, there were no contracts, no pretense, only two people who had found love in the most unlikely place. As the gates closed behind them, Lila looked back one last time and said quietly, "Every wrong road led me here." Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And I would take every one of them again if it meant finding you." The camera of the world might have turned away from them, but their story was far from over. It had only just begun.
Not for the cameras, not for my image, but because I cannot imagine my life without you. Tears welled in her eyes, falling freely before she could stop them. "You are impossible," she whispered. "So are you," he said with a smile. She let out a shaky laugh and nodded. "Yes, Ethan, but only if you promise not to make me sign anything again." He laughed softly, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Deal," he said. Then he stood, pulling her into an embrace that felt like home. In that moment, the noise of the city faded, and all that remained was the quiet truth of two people who had finally stopped pretending. Weeks later, the tabloids carried a different headline. Ethan Cole steps away from empire to build a foundation with his wife. But the real story never made the news. It lived in a small cafe they opened together on a quiet corner of the city. Above the door hung a sign, in simple letters, "The Spill." Inside, a framed photo of a coffee-stained suit hung on the wall, with a handwritten note beneath it: "The best mistakes are the ones that teach us how to love." And every morning, when Ethan brewed the first cup, he smiled at Anna and said, "This time, I will try not to spill it." She would laugh, shake her head, and reply, "I would not mind if you did," because for them, every drop, every flaw, every accident had led exactly where it was meant to.